welcome to the Thriving Life Podcast, a weekly podcast designed to help you thrive, not just survive through challenges of life, leadership, and faith. We are living in some extraordinary times right now. Lots of historic things are happening around us, and some very important conversations are happening as well. A couple of years ago at Mission, actually, we had a message series called Scars and Stripes, where we had some very similar conversations around race and reconciliation, restoration. And so we thought it'd be a good idea for this week to just hit pause on our normal format and play back for you one of those conversations from that series that Joel had with a close friend and fellow pastor of his, Joseph Sojourner. So I'd like you to sit back, listen to the conversation, and learn from Joseph's words.
I can still tell you what it was like when my mom walked in our house when I was just in second grade. She walked in and she said, "We're not going to that school that was just built down the street." And I remember myself and my brothers literally thinking, well, where are we going to go? What are we going to do? My older brother, John, myself, Joseph, and my twin brother, Justin, all crowded around, completely perplexed, like, what in the world are we going to do? Well, my mom was a second grade teacher of 30 years, so she believed in optimal learning environments, something that she could not find in the area that I now refer to as the ghetto. And the thing about the ghetto is it just doesn't quite have all the things that my mom was looking for. And she said, it's not going to be easy, but we're going to need to save up. And not being easy was an understatement. My mom and my dad had divorced when we were just babies, and so we knew that she was just getting by on what she could make as a teacher. She said, for the next year, we're going to just save up, and for lunches, you're going to have honey butter sandwiches, just a piece of bread, margarine, and honey squirted in another piece of bread slapped together, as well as big pots of spaghetti every single night for dinner. It's why to this day, when I go hang out with my friends and we have something to eat and we do breakfast, they give me biscuits and honey, I say, get that honey out my face. I don't want it. I don't want any parts of it. But sure enough, by about the year mark, we had saved up enough, and I still remember us pulling up to that house in that U-Haul, my mom jumping out and saying, this is it, this is our new house, and she's running in and out with the boxes, and I can tell that she's so excited, and here we are, not being half as excited, because we don't know where she's taking us to, and when she's ripped us away from everything that we knew, and if she knew what was to come, I wonder if she would have been as excited either. I can still tell you my first day of third grade. I can tell you what I was wearing. A turquoise Michael Jordan t-shirt that said Air Joseph on the back. I thought the shirt was so cool people would want to be my friends. And as I'm walking in, I remember thinking everything about this school looks different. I mean, it looks different, smells different. Nothing sounds the same. Everything about this is just so foreign to what I truly knew and what I've grown accustomed to. But I thought as long as I have my twin brother Justin, everything is going to be A-okay. Well, my mom knew that I would hide behind Justin, so she had gone ahead to the administration and said, I need you to separate Joseph and Justin in all their classes so they can make their own friends. That's my mom. That's the kind of woman she is. So here we are, walking forward. We get to the intersection. I say, Justin, our class is right. He says, no, our class is left. And I said, no, my paper says right. He says, mine says left. And there goes Justin walking down the hallway, sending me walking by myself to my first period class. And I remember getting to the door and just stopping. I remember thinking, whoa, everything is really different. Everyone begins to look at me, and I immediately beeline to the back of the room, and I just search for my name, Sojourner, and I finally find it, and I sit down in the seat. And I remember looking up, everyone kind of looking over their shoulder at me, and I remember thinking, I'm so different. It's the first time in my life I remember feeling different. We were the first blacks to integrate Monroe Elementary. People always ask me, you were born during civil rights? I said, does it look like I was born during civil rights? No. It's just that my mom found the only school that had no blacks before us. That's my mom. That's the kind of woman she is. Y'all need to meet her. Now, I'm not going to lie to you. I had never seen that many white people in all my 8 years of existence. I can't even lie to you. It was like walking into an REI. I literally thought, what in the world? It's like, do we know about this place? Did we ever even seen this place? And I remember thinking the TV shows are different. The music is different. The jokes that they're making are different. I mean, nothing that they walk, talk, and act like was familiar to me. Everything was so foreign. And there were moments where I thought, well, maybe they don't notice that I'm not catching on as fast. Maybe they don't notice that I'm different. And in those moments, they would say, no, we do notice that you are very different. And what started as innocent, what started as just a few comments turned a little bit more sharp over time. And here I was entering the fourth grade, and that extroverted kid began to quiet. And I began to be a product of bullying, so much to the place where I thought, I just don't want anyone to pick on me. I was a small kid. I had a small body, big head. I had to grow into this thing. And so anytime they pick on me, I'd always get really, really excited to make sure that they knew that I was a grown man, that I couldn't be picked on. I was fourth grade. My brother, Justin, my twin, was a lot bigger than me. He was about double my size. So they'd always wait till he'd walk away. And then they would say, your twin brother's not here to protect you. And here my head is bobbing around. I say, I don't need my twin to protect me. I don't need anybody. I'm a grown man. I can defend myself. And I would get so upset because I wanted them to view me as a man that I would do anything. I would fight anyone to prove that I was a man. But I made a promise to my mom. She said, it took every single thing that I have to move to this neighborhood and get you to this school. You will not get in a fight. And I kept that promise to my mom all the way to the 5th grade. There I was. It was presentation day the next day, and my teacher said, hey, all the work that you've been doing working on your restaurants, tomorrow's presentation day, and I want everyone to get in front of the class and present your menus to the class. And I remember thinking this is the worst idea she could possibly make. I know that I cannot stand in front of this class and not expect to be bullied, and I stayed over that day, and I said, listen, I don't know if you know who I am. My name is Joseph Sojourner. If there's any way you can let me off the hook tomorrow so that I don't have to stand in front of this class, you could just read my report, give me the A or the B that you're going to give me, and really just allow me not to stand in front of this class, I would greatly appreciate it. And she looked at me and she said, Joseph, I read your report, and I think this class deserves to hear all the work that you placed into it. I said, I did work hard on it. Now, that's true. And I was convinced to present. There I was the next day, shaking, hoping that all goes well, standing with my cardboard cut out of the menu, and I'm presenting my fried pickles on page 2 with the dip. Hand shoots up in the back. Question! You know questions are never good when you're in the middle of a presentation, right? You try and push on, and I'm presenting all my pizzas and my burgers. Question! I think I just need to keep going. I can maybe make it to the end. Question! His name was Jerry. There's always one, right? Jerry was his name. And so finally I said, yes, Jerry, what's your question? And I'll never forget what he asked next. He said, your pizzas that you serve, do they have chitlins and watermelon on them? And it wasn't the comment that was so terrible. It was the fact that the entire class erupted in roar and laughter. And I threw my menu down, and I jumped over my desk, and I grabbed him. And just as I got ready to punch him, the teacher grabbed me, and I swing, and I miss, and I shove him over a desk. And I'm literally trying to get back to him, but she's got me by the shirt, and she drags me till she gets me in the hallway. And I turn to the locker, and I punch the lockers until finally I lock eyes with her. And I say, I told you that this would happen. Why did you make me do it? And then I slid down on the ground and just started to cry as I heard the roaring laughter of the class behind me as they listened to me in the hallway. And I will never forget what she said to me next, because she leaned down and got right in my line of vision. And she said, Joseph, how much longer are you going to let their words control you? And here I was, couldn't even catch my breath. What? She says it again. How much longer are you going to let their words control you? And then she just got up and walked back in the class. And her words echoed in my mind through the absolutely brutal middle school years, where the name calling only got worse, where the abuse turned physical, and I just couldn't seem to catch a break. It got so bad that my first day of high school, 9th grade, walking into my basic metals class, the teacher said, I need you to talk to you up front. He said, we know the bullying that happens to you. We need you to do all your projects outside for your own protection. You need to do that just for you. And I said, absolutely, thank you so much. And the plan worked perfectly for about 4 weeks until 2 kids got sick, and the teacher had to take those 2 boys down to the nurse, which allowed 4 boys to walk out. And as I was painting my red metal box, they kicked it across the lot and beat me that day. And I just remember thinking, I can't catch a break. I did bad on a French test, and I remember walking after class, and I said, hey, listen, I can't get a B. I can't take home a B. My mom says all A's and B's, but I know I can get an A in this class. Is there anything I could do, extra credit, tutor, anything to pull this grade up? And the teacher looks at me over her papers. She pulls her glasses down, and she said, how am I supposed to teach you French when you can't even speak English? And I just remember standing there. And then I said I was sorry and walked out. That was the day I quit. That was the day I had no more fight left in me. There was nobody who was coming to rescue me, nobody that had my back. My mom saw that she was losing her boys. She knew she had to do something fast. She set up a meeting with the principal. She said, I don't know what else I can tell them to do. I'm telling them to turn the other cheek. I'm telling them never to swing. I'm telling them to always take the high road, but it's like my boys can't seem to catch a break. And the principal politely told her, man, what did you think would happen when you placed them in this school? My mom got home that night, went right to her room. She never wanted us to see her cry, and she just shut the door. And I heard her that night until finally she gathered herself and she walked out. John, Joseph, Justin, living room. We moseyed in quietly. She said, I need to take you out of that school. We're now 6 years, no friends, no speaking. I'm way past dreaming. I don't know what we're going to do at this point. I'm just thinking the worst. I said, what are we going to do then, Mom? My brother says, what about that school, Firestone? I remember I looked at John and I said, Firestone, the school 30 minutes away that's diverse with great education and great sports, what are you still dreaming for? You have the audacity to dream. Nothing good happens to us. My mom calls me down and says, let's at least fill out the applications. We fill them out, mail them off, and I didn't think anything else of it for about 3 weeks. We had a call on our answering machine. Yes, answering machine, not voicemail. We walked in and my mom hit play and said, congratulations, John, Joseph, and Justin have been accepted to Firestone High School. And I remember thinking in that moment, is something good actually going to happen to us? I can still tell you my first day of 10th grade, walking in and stopping literally 3 steps in and just looking in a hallway full of whites, blacks, and Hispanics, all chatting, chumming it up, laughing, horse playing all throughout the hallways. And I remember thinking, this is totally different than anything I've possibly seen. I put my head down and I walked all the way to my first period class, found the second to last seat, sat down, and literally just tried to disappear. Hopefully nobody would see me. Tap, tap, tap on my back. His name was Sean. Hey, man, you got a pencil? I said, I don't have a pencil. Tap, tap, tap. Come on, man, you don't have a pencil? I said, I'm being tested. I ain't got a pencil. Elevate your voice. Let them know you're not one to be played with. Tap, tap, tap on my back. Come on, man, I left my pencil in my last class. I know you got a pencil in that big book bag. I knew in that moment I had to do something drastic to make sure that nobody knew that I was going to be picked within this school. Not again. I jumped up. I knocked all the books off. I told you I ain't got a pencil. Don't touch me again. And I was kicked out of my first period class first day, just like that, sent to the principal's office. And I remember her looking at me, and she said, Joseph, I know your story. You need to trust us. This is a different school. I remember looking at her saying, trust. She said, I'm not going to suspend you. I'm not even going to put you on detention. I'm going to give you another chance tomorrow, a chance to trust us. I walked in that first period class on day 2, and I remember I walked by a girl's desk, and she said, is that the boy that flipped out over the pencil? He's crazy. I remember thinking, good. Now, nobody's going to pick on me. Nobody's going to try and bully me, and nobody's going to ask me for a pencil. We're now moving into 12th grade, 7 years, no speaking. No one knows your name. Nobody even really knows you exist. I remember my brother had grown. Now he's 6'7", 220 pounds. And so the football and basketball teams were trying to get him to try out. They sent 2 boys to his locker, and they were trying to get Justin to laugh. So finally he cracked and laughed. Right as I was coming around the corner moving into 12th grade, I remember thinking, I've never had 2 friends that I can laugh with in the hallway my entire life. And I remember thinking, that's all I want. And I went home that night and I said, God, give me friends that I can laugh with in the hallway, friends that I truly know are here for me. And my lights blinked and a bearded man in a robe lowered and sat at the edge of my bed. I'm lying, that did not happen. I woke up, still heard nothing. And I remember just thinking, I have to do something. I said, I'm going to make the choice to smile. I'm going to smile. If somebody looks at me, I'm going to smile. Somebody says my name, I'm going to smile. Somebody says a joke, I'm going to smile. I just want people to know that I'm not toxic and I'm a good person and I'm worthy to be friends with. And the plan worked because by the end of the year, 2 or 3 oddballs decided they wanted to be my friend, which is 2 or 3 more than I could have ever even dreamed up. And here we were walking back to my aunt's house where my mom would come and pick us up and drive 30 minutes back to our house. And we're walking back one day and one of my friends said, I'm going to stop in and get some pizza. I said, sure, I'll wait for you right out here. And he walks in, then walks out with 2 greasy napkins and hands me one. I said, what is this? He said, pizza. I said, for what? He said, for you. I said, why? He said, because I know you like pepperoni pizza. I said, I know, but why did you buy me it? He said, if you don't want the pizza, give it back. But it wasn't just pizza. It was the first moment in 12th grade I realized I had a friend. And to say that that was terrifying was an understatement. I was quiet as I ate that piece of pizza. Terrified as I got home and made this prayer, this covenant to God. I said, God, if you let these 2 friends stick around, I promise I will be the best friend that they've ever had. I promise I will love them well. God, I promise that I will be good to them. Just allow them not to begin to think I'm toxic like everyone else in my life. Allow them to just be here tomorrow. And to say that God answered that prayer would be a drastic understatement. It's as if my entire life I was covered by clouds, and all of a sudden he pulled those clouds away and began to shine light on me. And people in my school began to say, there's this really nice kid that goes to this school. There's this really nice kid that you can talk to, and he'll listen to your problems. He'll always try and help you out. His name is Joseph. You ought to get to know him. And I wasn't even new. I had been there for 3 years. Sure enough, things began to change. Teachers began to notice that people were flocking to me. I still could not tell you what it was in my 12th grade year that began to change other than that simple prayer. My glasses came off, my braces came off. I said, maybe if I dress a little bit different, a lady will notice me and she'll think that I'm handsome. And so I changed up a couple outfits, bought a couple with my little saved up Taco Bell money. And I came in one day in my 8th period and Yolanda looked at me and she says, "Oh my gosh, Joseph, you cute." I said, "Oh, thank you so much." I said, "Girl, this is 17 years in the crock pot. You better get yourself a fork." Everything was starting to change, and I didn't understand what it was. I truly was beginning to say, God is giving me influence, and I don't know what to do with it. And it all reached the pinnacle here towards the middle of the way through my 12th grade year when I walked into Black United Students, an organization that was extremely popular. And I remember sitting there listening. And I remember the blacks saying all of their dreams, aspirations, and goals. And I remember raising my hand and saying, "This is awesome, guys, but why are there no white people here?" And they said, "Well, it's called Black United Students." I said, "That's true. The name will kind of sift the white people out." And I said, "Well, we have dreams, problems, and aspirations. And they have dreams, problems, and aspirations. Maybe we should get all in one room. We should all start talking it out. Maybe we can all start figuring out what it would look like to make a better school for all of us. I mean, after all, it's going to take all of us working together. Maybe we should stop calling it Black United Students and just call it United Students." And the black teachers up front said, "You're crazy." And I was crazy. I asked when elections were. And then I hit the hallways and I began to talk to everybody I could. But finally, I locked eyes with Lauren. I said, "Lauren, I think you, Laura, are the president of Black United Students. I think you have the heart for it. I think you're able to listen. I think people literally trust you." And she said, "I would love to be the president, but Joseph, one thing, I'm white." I said, "That's true. That's a mountain we got to climb, and it's going to be a mountain." I said, "But I think if you listen to them, if you genuinely care, if you love them well, I think they'll look past the color of your skin." She said, "Really?" I said, "I do. I think." Sure enough, she campaigned through the halls alongside me, and I said, "I want you to listen to these stories. I want you to understand their heart. I want you to understand what their dreams are. Then I want you to communicate the other side to them, because maybe they've never heard it before." Until the day of elections came. And here we are, we walk into a room full of blacks, whites, and Hispanics, all crowded in, chanting, "United Students, United Students," as the black teachers filed in, locked on me, focused, shooting me with nails and daggers in their eyes. They announced the president of Black United Students as Laura, and the entire room erupted. And I'm seeing whites, Hispanics, and blacks grabbing each other, high-fiving, hugging, saying, "Look at what we did. Look at what we did to unify this school, to change everything that was before us, and begin to say that there's something greater that we all can do." And Laura, in that moment, began to walk forward. And then she turned and she looked at me from the front of the room. I'm too nervous to ever walk to the front of any room. And she walks her way all the way to the back, and she hugs me, and she begins to cry on me, and she whispers in my ear, "Look at what we did, and I don't even know what we've done. I don't even know what God is doing with my little hands and the little bit of influence he gave me with 1 year left in this school." I tell people, when you go through most of your childhood with nobody knowing your name, nobody even knowing you exist, you just dream for people. And as I travel this beautiful world and continue to fight and tell people that there's a greater tomorrow, I realized that the simple reason God put me on this very planet was for that reason, to dream for people.
Most weeks at this point in the service, I walk out and I say something like, "I'm really glad you decided to join us today." But today, I'm really glad you decided to join us. I know you haven't had an opportunity and you want to. Will you do me a favor and give my friend Joseph a really warm mission welcome? That's awesome. Well, I'm really glad you're here. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing a little bit of your story with us today. I want to give you a little context really quick. I told many of you at the beginning of the series, if you haven't been with us the last couple of weeks, we've been in the middle of this series called Scars and Stripes, and we've been talking about questions of race, responsibility, and reconciliation. I told you I've been getting input from people inside our church and outside of our church that didn't grow up like me, coming from different perspectives, and Joseph's one of those people. We've been talking about this this since well before we started this series, and I invited Joseph not only in on helping us shape the content, but to be a part of this series today. Joseph and I have known each other for almost a decade now.
Yeah.
He was on staff as a pastor at my previous church. I've seen him work with students. I've seen him be a pastor. He's a writer. He's a communicator. I've seen him teach both students and adults. Now he's shifted to a new role. He's traveling around the country, speaking to high school students, college students, young adults, literally all of the country and around the world, different places in the world. God's given him a lot of opportunity in that respect. In addition to that, Joseph's also a hip hop artist. He's a rapper, and he has, we're going to tell you a little bit more about this later. He has his most recent project is Fight Club, and we'll tell you a little bit about that. And I heard you're going to stick around and join us for the night of worship tonight.
So we're gonna
That's
have
awesome.
some fun.
So you won't want to miss that.
I'm gonna look a little bit different tonight now. Don't get nervous, but I'm gonna be a little bit different. I'm gonna be a little more energetic.
You'll probably enjoy that a little bit more than even this, so that's good. But that's a little context for Joseph. I've not only known him as a pastor and a writer and speaker, but as a friend for many years now. And I'm thrilled you're going to get to hear a little bit more from him today. I do need to say this up front. This is two friends having a conversation. We're trying to have a candid, honest conversation about some of the things we're talking about. If you haven't been with us, we're going to review a little of that content because I want to invite Joseph into that conversation, get a little bit of his feedback on some of the things we've been talking about. I know you've been tracking with us in this series. But I want to say this seems like it's worth saying. I don't represent every white person in the world up here in perspective, and that's not the point of this conversation. And Joseph doesn't represent all the minorities in the world. That's not the point of this. This is two different people coming from different backgrounds, trying to learn from one another, which we've been doing for a long time. And as specifically, we sort of sort out what it looks like for us to embrace this and respond to some really difficult questions about race and reconciliation. I just thought it'd be really good. We've done this once today. I'm not sure that this is going to go exactly like the other one did, but we just have some questions that are going to navigate us and a few quotes along the way that I'd like for us to respond to. I do want to back up. The first week of the series, we began with a question, and the reason we said we wanted to start with questions is because this is a conversation, and great conversations are led by great questions. And the first question we started with is this one right here: who is responsible? And one of the things we discovered is none of us agree on who's responsible, how did we get here, why the tension we're dealing with, and why does it seem elevated in our world now. We talked a little bit about that, but one of the things we discovered was that two things really are true. One, that there's people who can't take responsibility for actions in the past, and usually one person's irresponsibility becomes somebody else's responsibility. You understand this if you have kids. You understand this if you've had somebody in your life, a parent maybe even, a spouse act irresponsibly, and you've had to handle the responsibility of their irresponsibility. And so certainly that happened with you growing up. Yeah. We talked a little bit about that, but we also talked about the fact that we were given a responsibility. In fact, the first week we looked at this scripture right here, 2 Corinthians 5, that God, because he reconciled us to himself, he's committed to us the message of reconciliation. Mm-hmm. We're therefore Christ's ambassadors, and as though God were making his appeal through us. So our first step was sort of, this is our responsibility. And it's the reason I bring that up, and the reason I want to bring this conversation is because at least it seems to me in your story, that first conversation with your teacher in the hallway as you slid down the lockers was a beginning point for you, a turning point for you that had other developing points along the way, but where you began to go, I have some responsibility here, and I need to take responsibility. I can't just continue to, we've been talking about the blame game, blame other people and point a finger. Tell me a little bit about that and why that was so impactful and why it's such an important point in your life.
And I don't even know if it was the first conversation, but it's it's the first that I remember. And I feel like there probably were plenty of people that have said that to me, what she said to me that day. How long are you going to let their words control you? Probably before that. But there are moments that happen in life where when an adult is there to speak into a young person's life, that's the comment that's burned into our memories, because this is when we needed it most, in a moment we were in a crisis moment. So I always tell adults, it's so crucial to continue to walk with young people, because when they have that crisis moment, it's the words that you'll say in that moment that will be forever burned in their memory, and they'll begin to use them as compasses as they walk through life. And so she was just there for me in that moment. And what she showed me was, yes, it's easy for you to be the victim in this moment. It's easy for you to say, well, look at what's happened to me. Why would you let them do this to me? But she said, how long are you going to let their words control you. And it's the first thing I begin to say now as I walk into schools and I look at angry kids that might be underprivileged and they might have a lot of anger in their heart. I'll say, yes, some of that injustice is true, but how long are you going to let that consume you from being the excellence that God's placed in you? And so I do think it continues to work. I think why this scripture meant so much when you were going through it was because I do think the church has this unique ability. And I was talking to one of my white friends, and he was saying I was sitting with some black leaders, and they began to talk, and I said, it's not my fault. I don't want you to think that I did any harm to you guys. That was my great-great-great-grandparents, and here we are. I'm here dealing with this. He's like, but it's not my fault. And one of his friends said, hey, I'm really sorry if you thought that we were blaming you and making you feel like it was your fault. It is not your fault, but it is your problem. And I think that was the moment he said it clicked, and he said, I realized that it's not my problem, it's our problem. And that's what they were trying to explain to me, that they were saying, we're going to be as transparent and honest to you about our story so that you can understand this is a problem that we all have to work together to fix, which I just think the church is uniquely equipped to be able to show what God's love looks like day in and day out, which in turn allows people to begin to see how to handle racial reconciliation.
As you've talked about that as seeing the mountain. How important it is for us together. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I feel like the biggest task, I feel like what's difficult when you go into the public sector versus faith churches and faith organizations is that we're able to see something greater than just ourselves. So out beyond the church, I think people are more or less like we're forced to choose a side. Because I think a lot of people have their perceptions of what America looks like. And I think that when you start entering the church, you have this unique ability to say, what's greater than us? Yes, I'm proud to be American and I love America, but I hold another title above that, and that is I'm prouder to be a Christian. And so I think when you begin to say that I bear this title of a Christian, you understand that that holds a whole different level of responsibility that American cannot even begin to. And that is saying that we have to empathize, we have to listen to, and we have to begin to figure out what we can do the same way that Jesus would. So the first step is just simply saying, is there a mountain? And I think when you can get a full group of people, a full body of people to say, yes, this mountain is something that we need to begin to climb, it's just a huge accomplishment. And right now, currently, the only group of people I've seen that have been able to all turn together and say, this is a mountain that we have to climb is in the church. And I think it's because of the unique title that we bear that transcends above being just an American.
Yeah. And I think the thing, that's sort of what we've been trying to wrap our minds around is the reality is in Christ, there is a commonality where we can move toward one another and look at the mountain and go, okay, agree that there is a mountain,
yes,
that there is a problem. And while we don't fully understand it, we don't know how to climb it, to move toward one another and go, the mountain's over there. I told you this in our private conversation. I'm not an expert. I said this, confess this. I'm not an expert on this subject. And I don't know that I'm an expert on marriage, but I have thousands of hours counseling people who have been in crisis and are trying to reconcile. And one of the things I learned was actually through a study. There was a study that was done that observed couples that were going through counseling for thousands of hours and thousands of couples. And what they discovered is they came down to one commonality between couples that were able to reconcile and couples that weren't. As a matter of fact, they discovered a principle so simple that they were able to discover it within the first 30 minutes of the first session with a counselor. And the difference between couples that were able to reconcile their differences and reconcile their problems and couples that weren't were how they saw the problem. Couples that went, hey, we have a problem. There's a problem between us and there's the problem. They didn't make it. The couples that were able to set the problem over here and go, hey, we have this problem and we don't know how to climb this problem or solve this problem or fix this problem, but we together both see the problem and we see it differently, but we're trying to figure out how to solve the problem. That was the difference. And I believe there's something very similar to that in this issue, that I think it's a universal principle that when we can begin to together say, hey, we're gonna let our commonalities in Christ pull us together, and then we're gonna look at some of the differences and challenges that our different cultural upbringings and different cultural backgrounds has created when you begin to put those things together. That's a big difference. I need to keep us moving because I want to get to a really important question today. The second question we wrestled with was how should we view our responsibility? And one of the things we talked about is how we view things isn't always how we should view things. That sometimes we view things from our perspective and it's not how things really are. And one of the thoughts around that was that bias or prejudice is really hard to see in the mirror. When you have your own perspective, it's really difficult to see unless you see it from somewhere else's perspective. And we talked about Peter last week. Here's a leader of the church, and he realized the minute he walked into a room that was full of people who weren't like him, people he had a bias against. it surfaced in him. And as a matter of fact, last week we talked about the fact that Peter, the leader of the church, he had to have God show him what his bias was. And when he walked in the room, his confession was, I now realize how true it is, that God doesn't show favoritism. So here's my question for you. What have you discovered, and how have you discovered your own personal biases, prejudices, or how your differences has caused to see people different from you? So what has God shown you about that?
I think it took me a long season as I was going through all those elementary, middle school, high school years where I think I struggled to understand white people, and I more or less was saying, I'm looking in many of their eyes, and they're looking at me with sympathy and empathy and saying that that's not fair what's happening to them, but I just didn't hear from them. I didn't hear anything from them, and so I began to say, can you trust people who literally will just watch you be abused? But as I was struggling with these thoughts, I remember just thinking, you can't put a blanket statement on all white people just because this situation, as you walk through life year after year, they may not jump up to have your defense. And I do think it was just God that moved us to a school where we began to see totally different kind of people. And I say that was such an isolated incident. Yeah, sure, it was third grade all the way to ninth grade. But I will say that as I moved into a different school, I was able to truly say, okay, so I knew that not all white people were like this. But it was a wrestle in those years to just be like, I don't even know if I can trust anyone because it seems like nobody feels like I'm worth even fighting for.
Yeah, and I've heard you say that oftentimes what happens is even though these things aren't widespread, a few of us, or all of us get penalized because of a few of us, because of the behavior of a few, because there's people in this room like myself going, I've never treated somebody like that. But the reality is, and you and I talked about this several weeks ago when the events happened in Charlottesville. I'm watching the television going, who puts this on television? Like I see some white guys with young white guys with torches, and I'm going, I mean, this is irresponsible. How are there not guidelines that don't allow this to be on television? I understand free press, all that. There's part of me that's just like, this is ridiculous. And, as we talked, I realized like, you know me, so you think I'm I know that's ridiculous. Mm-hmm. But for people who don't know me, it may create a gap where they begin to wonder, because I look like some of those people, they may wonder, well, is he really against that? And you've talked about this. It's different. Yeah. There's a difference between being racist or not being a racist and being anti-racism. Mm-hmm. So
yeah, and I think that's where my friends in our moments of friction, where when they were like, I'm not racist, I'm not a racist, I began to say, I want to hear your side. And as they began to articulate how they felt, I began to see that it's easy for them to say, I feel like I'm being hunted as, am I racist or are you not racist? And that was the moment where I had to stop and apologize and say, if you've ever felt that way, I apologize. Most blacks are not making the argument of, are you racist? Mm-hmm. I don't think we're looking at most of our white friends and saying you're racist. That's not. The question that we're asking our white friends is, are you anti-racist? How anti-racist are you? And the moments where it hurts most is when you look at your friend and say, did you care enough to say anything about me? Did you care enough about me to speak up? The same way if I was at a black barbershop and they began to talk about you, I would sit up and say, hey, no, that's not true. That's not the narrative of white people. And if you were sitting beside me, you'd appreciate that. You'd be like, I appreciate that he so fiercely defends me. He will not let a group of blacks talk negatively about me. The same hope is what we're hoping for in our white friends of saying, how anti-racist are you? Are you willing to stand up for me the same way I would stand up for you? And I think that those are those moments. One of my white friends said this past Thanksgiving, he took me to lunch afterwards, and he was a pastor, and he said, I had a really difficult Thanksgiving dinner, and he said, I had to stand up and talk to my father and to let him know that, hey, the way that you're talking about black people is unacceptable, and I don't want my kids to sit here at this table and hear you talking about that. And I don't think he understood how much love I felt in that moment for him to say, I won't just sit by and allow you to talk this type of rhetoric to my children because I'm that anti-racist. And I think it's a beautiful thing. And that's what I think is beautiful when we begin to link arms. And I think that's where it comes with the Christianity. I just think that's what gives us the power and strength to do that.
Well, and that's amazing, because that's not only powerful to you, but think about how powerful that is for his kids and the next generation to see him stand up to a generation before him and say, no. We're not going to pass that along, that way of thinking along again. It's going to stop sort of with my generation. Well, here's the question I want to get to today, and I'm sort of moving us ahead, but here's the question is, what does it mean to reconcile? Because I think everybody has different opinions about this. We're going to look at a few different quotes. People have tried to define what reconciliation really looks like. But interpersonally, I want to have a really real conversation of what does this look like among people that have differences, because differences can create challenges. Yes. It can create tension, it can create problems, and we're going to talk about a few other things in a minute, but I want to start with some definition. It's actually really helpful. I do, when I do research, I look at a lot of different things, and usually I look up words, like I try to look up, hey, what's the actual definition? And I thought this was really helpful. There's 3 specific definitions that were given in Webster's dictionary, specifically about reconciliation. The first one is to restore to friendship or harmony. And this specifically is to settle or reconcile differences, which, as you know, as we talked about, can create some challenges. But I feel like there's lots of different opinions about how you settle and reconcile differences. I've heard you talk a little bit about it's different for you. It was different for you than just having white friends, for you to understand white culture. Talk a little bit about that.
It's easy for me to have white friends and not truly take the time to learn white culture. Just the way it's as simple for my white friends to have a black friend, but not truly have ever taken the time to learn black culture. So I do think it's easy for someone to say, well, I have a black friend. And I'll say, but how long have you spent the time to learn about that person's culture? And I think as you begin to dive into one's culture, one's heritage, I think that's where the celebration begins. And that's where we're able to say, there is so much that you're able to teach me. Now I love hummus and avocados. I would have never had this dip before. This dip is incredible. Thank you. This is different. I would have probably gone something different.
That's awesome. Okay, I got to move us along. You completely throw me off with that. There's a quote, and this sounds good, but there's inherent problems in this. You hear this idea of being colorblind. That's a very popular thing. It's like, if we could just be colorblind. In fact, Lyndon Johnson said this. He said, until justice is blind to color, till education is unaware of race, until opportunity is unconcerned with the color of men's skin, and emancipation will be a proclamation, but not a fact. On the surface, this sounds really good, and there's some good in this, but there's some challenges. Talk about it.
I do. I love the fact that he's saying that the systems that we all walk within are not going to be biased to color, and I think that's great. But I think the distinction that has to be made is the systems cannot be biased to color, but we can celebrate color ourselves as relationships. So I do think as I look at you, I know that you're a white man, I'm a black man, and so we can begin to ask each other questions to learn more about how to better love people of different cultures. So I do think this works for systems, it just does not work for people.
Yeah.
And so I think as we're beginning to do life and really truly walk with people, I think the worst thing we can do is say, I'm not going to acknowledge your color, and I want us all to just kind of assimilate to one style of behavior. I think what we need to say is, okay, help me gain some clarity. What can I learn more about you and the way that you are naturally wired? And I think that's where we begin to have a deeper appreciation of the different colors we all have.
Yeah, and that's why you love hummus and avocado now.
It is true.
But I think that the important thing is it's so easy to take a statement like this and go, because I think we all agree with that, like, hey, our systems, they shouldn't be biased. They shouldn't be prejudiced. They should be colorblind. But it's so easy for us to take that and then go, yeah, we should all be colorblind. And I read this great, I was reading and studying for this, and I ran into a blog by a woman that's an author. She's from Oregon originally. She lives in Sydney, Australia. She's a missionary there in the inner city in Sydney, Australia. And almost as a byproduct of what she was doing there, she began to have influence among women really around the world. Started this movement where she's investing in women, and it's mostly moms, and it's moms in developing countries. And really, she's doing this to really begin to leverage her voice, leverage the gospel for shaping the next generation, and sees as an opportunity to invest in moms who are discipling their kids to really change the next generation. And I love what she says about this in her conversations about with her own kids and with other women. One of the things she said, and I'm gonna put this quote up here, she said, I won't teach them that love is colorblind, I'll teach them that love sees. That love actually sees differences, it sees color, it sees diversity, and it celebrates those things. It elevates the best of those things. And I think that's what's beautiful about the church. We've been given a love. We were loved by a God who saw our differences. He saw our failures. He saw our drawbacks, and he moved toward us anyway. What does it look like to see differences and in love move toward one another?
I mean, I think that's It's beautiful because I think that we not only just see color, but it doesn't stop there with the church. I think that's why it's so impactful, because they can only tack on color to the fact that then I'm messed up and they still love me. And then I don't even believe what they believe and they still love me. And then I have tons of questions and yet they still love me. And I think that that's the beauty of where the church says, yes, when it comes to color, that's one thing, but we'll add on 50,000 other things. And I think that's why the church has just a brighter tomorrow. And I think that a lot of people are able to see it a lot differently.
Well, we talk about that around here all the time. In fact, I've told you this. We've sort of set ourselves up for that in that, we believe that the church for too long has been known for what it's against. And so we want to be known for what we're for.
Yes.
And we really believe that Jesus has the ability to change everything for everyone. And we want to be a church that's really known for everyone. That's something that these days we're really rallying around. We want people to know that regardless of whether you're different than us, you believe different, everything that you just said.
It's not easy.
It's not easy. It's not easy. And the thing is, this doesn't rise and fall on me or somebody who stands up here. This is all of us. It's when people show up here, people interact with us. How could you encourage us? Because some of this is the separation. All we see in our culture is hate. We don't see love. What does it look like for us to see people different than us, love them, and in a sense, really be for them? That doesn't just happen when we get a bunch of people that are unlike each other in a room together.
No, I think it starts with first turning to the mountain and saying, okay, there's a mountain that we can tackle together. That's the first step, and that's what I feel like it's so beautiful that happens. And literally, as I've been traveling, I've been telling people, like, there's this church in Arizona that is tackling this issue, and they are fearless, and they are talking about it for 3 weeks. People are like, whoa. And so it's cool to see people kind of tuning in and texting me and saying it's cool that they're just willing to face it together, and that's what the church needs to be. The first is getting the people to say, hey, what's the mountain? How can we begin to walk it together? The second is two questions that I always ask myself. And the first is, what can I learn from somebody that doesn't look like me? Because there's something beautiful that we can learn from anyone that doesn't look like us. So it doesn't matter your socioeconomic background. It doesn't matter the color of your skin. I can learn something from you. That's first. And the second is saying, what can I do for someone who doesn't look for me? How can I help someone who doesn't look like me? Because I know that I live in a society where someone that does not look like me is even going to think that I would. They're going to think that I'm more biased to help someone that looks like me. And so I do think as my friends and all of us begin to walk through, no matter where we go, it's like, hey, we are super conscious to help people that don't look like us because we know it goes double the distance. And I think when people are able to say, wow, you did all that for me, and you didn't even have to. And I'm like, I did, but I want to show you that I'm in this fight with you. I'm fighting for you just as hard as I want you to fight for me.
Yeah, and because our goal isn't just to collect people that aren't like each other, to get all those people together. In fact, your friend Trip Lee has a take on this
I love that.
I know you
Trip
love.
Lee's a rapper, and he's kind of in the same fight. He's just started a church actually in Atlanta, and he's kind of grown. But he says this kind of, he says, our goal is not to get black people and white people in the same room. Jay-Z can do that. He said, we want blacks and whites in the same family. And that's why I think the church's task is just so much more steep.
And I think that's the shift. It's one thing to say, hey, we want to be for everyone, and we have a gospel that's for everyone. But what does that look like when people actually show up? Do they feel like we're for them? And how are we for them? As we're getting to know people that aren't like us, as we work with people who aren't like us, as we live next door to people who aren't like us, whether it is the color of their skin or their socioeconomic background or what they do or the way they live, the way they operate their lives. What does it look like for us to be for those people? And that's one of the things I love. It leads me to our second definition. There's a second definition as it relates to reconciliation, and it's to make consistent or congruent. And this is what we haven't talked a lot about in this series. It's the kind of the idea to reconcile an ideal with reality. Now, this is sort of a little bit difficult to wrap your mind around, but this is not just celebrating differences, restoring relationship. This is almost more of like a justice issue. This is about making things congruent and really helping a group of people that in some ways feel disadvantaged or have been disadvantaged. And we all understand this, and I'm going to take this in a different context because it's easier to see. We all understand this when it comes to our finances. Most of us know what a budget is. Some of us have a budget. Most of us aren't good at living according to our budget. If you're like me, most of us are probably in this boat. Every month, you may have a budget. And when you go to reconcile your budget, which if you want your ideals, the reason you have a budget is you go, ideally, this is how we want to spend our money. Because we want to save a certain amount, we want to give a certain amount, we want to invest a certain amount, we want to pay all our bills, handle our responsibilities. We have some goals and ideals. And if we want that to become a reality, we have to live according to our budget. In my opinion, the budget is what we've done through, and we've made some progress through our laws in this country in the last, really 4 or 5 decades, between laws and some ethics that we've created in business. But all we did really was create a budget. In order for us to reconcile the budget, this takes us all the time, regularly. Government can't do that. That's people choosing to go, hey, I'm gonna see where we've overspent and where we've underspent. And I'm gonna take responsibility, and this is one of the things I love is this seems like what you've been doing your whole life is going, hey, I'm gonna try and take, and I even go back to when you began to get a little bit of influence, and you had a little bit of leverage, leveraging the influence that you had to go, hey, I wanna make this better for everybody, not just people who look like me. But there are some inequities, there are some things, and bringing people together to go, hey, let's make our ideals become a reality. So how do we do that? Like, what is that?
First off, let me put a confession out here. For a long time, I talked to young people and simply said that adults were hopeless. There's no hope left for adults.
Which is why you talk to teenagers instead of adults now.
I do. I talk to teenagers because they literally are holding on to these ideals of what tomorrow can look like. As I began to go further and further, I began to realize that adults are needed in this journey too, because their first question were, well, what's happening right now? What can we join right now that we can be part of? And I do think the young people said, we can't build the machines that can begin to make change. Only adults can. And that was the moment where I had to put my bias and my prejudices of people who were like me. I mean, we're adults who were saying, but the adults aren't going to move to action and start saying, no, you're right. We need the adults, because there are adults that understand this ideal and say, you know what, with the time we have left, we are going to give everything we have for this generation that comes behind us, so that when we are done, you'll be able to say, they fought well, they gave everything they could, and they built all these machines to help love people better for us. They began to hold on to their ideals and build towards them for a better reality. And so that's the reason why I'm so passionate now about adults. So
I feel like for us, one of the real keys in this, we started the series by going, hey, if we could just, the first step is just, are we willing to take responsibility? I mean, if as Christians, and I realize there may be people here visiting and they may be new and they don't consider themselves Christian, but for those of us who are Christians, I mean, are we really willing to accept our responsibility that we've been given this message and this ministry of reconciliation is number one. Number two, going, hey, God, can you show us our bias? Help us understand our bias. And obviously moving toward people who aren't like us helps us in that. But asking God, show us our bias. The third thing is, how do you begin to develop a heart for this and to see this and almost develop a conscience? Andrew Young, I had the opportunity to learn from him. Some of you may not know who Andrew Young is. If you lived in Atlanta, you know who he is. He has done so much amazing things in the world. Actually, for Atlanta, he was one of the guys that was critical to bringing the Olympics to Atlanta. Yes. But he was in the inner circle with Dr. Martin Luther King, and it was a big part of that movement. And I remember sitting with him, and after spending some time learning from him, I did a lot of reading. And one of the things Andrew Young says is this. He says any racial reconciliation we've had in this country has come not out of confrontation, but out of spirit of reconciliation. It's not just about confronting people who aren't like us. It's not about confronting even trying to combat laws or the past. It's really originated with a spirit of reconciliation. People who have a heart and a spirit for reconciliation. So my question is, how do you develop that? Because I'll just say this, and I know you don't see yourself this way, but I see like God has just created that in you. Like from a young age, partly because of your background, you've been in backgrounds where we were with primarily a black community, and then primarily a white community, and then a very diverse community. And even as an adult, I see you all the time in environments that are primarily with people like you, primarily with people who aren't like you, and in very diverse environments. How does one develop a spirit or a heart of reconciliation?
I think it takes accountability, and I think being able to surround yourself with like-minded people, as well as people that may not walk the way you walk. I think it's our task to love them well. But I think when you surround yourself with like-minded people, being Christians who are able to call out things in you when you say things and are willing to be fearless, I think it begins to sharpen you and begin to widen your perspective. I always tell our friends when we sit down and have one of these types of conversations, I'll say, hey, from this moment on, look at my heart, don't look at my words. Because I know that you're probably going to say something, you're going to misspeak, you're going to say something that's going to hurt, and my natural response is going to be to lash back out or become defensive, but yet I keep my eyes focused on your heart. And so I do think it is saying we have to remember that we're having this conversation for a greater purpose, and that is we know that Jesus would have had these. We saw Jesus having these conversations. We saw Jesus walking every single day in his life to shatter the biases and the prejudices that lived in during his day. So we know we have the same responsibility, which is just hard to put that type of conviction on someone who does not carry the title of a Christian or does not have a belief that runs deep. And so that's why I think I have so much hope, because I think that when you accept Jesus and you accept him to be your Lord and Savior, he immediately ignites this fire to say, okay, what are the mountains then that I have to face? My own mountains, and then the mountains that are around me, in order for his gospel to get out and be able to reach all people. And so I think that's the reason why I have so much hope in the church, and why I know that the church is simply people who carry the work of the church in their hearts.
That's good. And I'll just tell you, just my confession, I personally, this is something I desired. And I know that as we grow, even just what you said, as we grow more in our faith in Christ and learn more of what it is to be like him, that's how we develop. When we become less of us, and we begin to peel our flesh away and Christ lives his life really through us, we begin to develop that spirit. And I told you, I started just praying, Lord, give me a spirit of reconciliation. Give us a spirit of reconciliation. Because on some level, I think some of that is something I can't develop myself. For some of us, our biases are created by our context, by where we come from. We're all a product of where we came from. But there's something, and we've all seen this. Most of us have experienced the miracle of transformation in our lives through Christ and the power of his work in our lives. And this is yet another work that Christ needs to do in many of us to bring about a spirit of reconciliation in us. Here's why I bring this up, and I want to finish with this. I want to get your reaction to this, and then we'll close. There's a third definition, and this one haunted me. This one was really challenging me. And the third definition is to cause to submit to or accept something unpleasant. A third definition of reconciliation is to be reconciled to hardship. And I really believe that when we're not doing the work we need to do here to restore friendship and harmony, we're not doing the work we need to do here to take our ideals and make them become a reality, there's a group of people that find themselves just reconciled to hardship. And I've had some conversations with people that just go, you know what, I just don't think it's gonna change. And I've reconciled the hardship. And I think the beginning of gaining a spirit of reconciliation is having that internal alarm in us that goes when we see that to go, gosh, I need to move toward people like that. Where have you seen that?
There's two stories in particular I immediately think about. The first, I had a chance to go into the Saudi Arabia area, and we did a Fight Club show. And the whole idea of Fight Club is fight for others. We fight for the one person who doesn't feel like they deserve to be fought for. And so I'm thinking we're gonna get maybe 20 people out. About 400, 500 young people come out to this concert. And I remember asking them, why did so many come, especially assuming that we all know it's biased to Christianity. I mean, this concert leans more Christian, even though we can't technically say Christian in these streets, in this area, because of how hostile it's become. And the young Emirati children especially began to come to me, and they said, we believe that we just want to know more about this idea of fighting for, because we were raised in a world where we fight against based on our beliefs. And if this belief is truly about fighting for everyone, including you, and you look different than me, then we want to be part of this right here. Mm-hmm. And right then and there, the person who was saying was this extremely privileged kid, who him making that declaration meant that he was going to lose all his wealth, all his family name, and he was going to be kicked out of his house. And yet he believed so deeply that this was the way he needed to be living. He began to join this movement. And that's when I began to see things much more clearly and be like, it's a privilege to live in this country. But even these kids that live over here are able to kind of grip this banner of what Christianity is all about. The second was in Haiti, and I walked through the streets of Haiti, and I'm seeing the devastation, and you're looking at this, and it just feels hopeless. It's the first place I walked where I said, where's the hope? I mean, what can you do to rebuild all of this? And I began to sit with the parents, and I said, how do you find hope? And they said, we know our lives are finished. We're never going to get our economy back or our agriculture built or the systems built to bring our lives back. So we've all decided to give everything we have for our kids. Mm-hmm. And we're gonna surrender to this life and reconcile a life to hardship for the ones that come behind us. And I remember when I walked out, I just thought, if we can't take that in the greatest country of all to live in, then I think we're missing a greater message. And I think I came back more charged up from those two locations, because I said, we need to give every single thing we have here in this beautiful country for the generation that comes behind us. And the worst thing we can do is be trapped by our comforts and luxuries. And so I do think that all of us in this room understand that the task of our generation of Christians is to be reconciled to hardship, to begin to climb this mountain together, to have the conversations that we know that people probably have not had before us because they were too busy fighting for justice. Yeah. And so now we get to fight for love, which is a totally different kind of fight. Okay, justice has been given, laws have been made, we know people are protected. But what does it look like to genuinely love people well? That's our fight. And that is a much more intricate, close, intimate fight and battle. And that's going to be difficult and hard. But the ones that come behind us will say they fought well. They fought well, and now we know how to love people better.
That's awesome. That is exactly what we're talking about in this series. That's so great. For us to take on hardship instead of putting it on somebody else is what it is to take responsibility for the ministry and message of reconciliation. I want to close in a different way. I want us to pray together. I've asked Joseph to pray for us. I'd like for you to all to stand with us, if you don't mind. I'm going to do something we don't normally do here. It might make some of you uncomfortable. I'd love for you just to reach over and grab the hand of the person next to you. Somebody who's standing next to you, reach down the aisle if you got to move. I'd love for you to, I'm going to put my arm around you if that's all right. And I'm going to ask Joseph to pray for us as we close our service and we close our series together.
God, thank you for the work you're doing here in Arizona. Thank you for the work you're doing here in this church through the people that are sitting right here in these seats. And we know we walk out these doors from this moment on. We walk back into our communities. We walk back into our homes, into our jobs, into our families. And we know there's a lot of work to be done. But God, we're all facing this mountain, and we know that it's going to take you giving us the strength, giving us the power, giving us the perspective, and most importantly, giving us the love to be able to climb this mountain well. But God, we keep our eyes focused on you, knowing that you're the one that's laying a path for the ones that come behind us. And so, God, we pray that we could just continue to move, continue to give all that we have, so that those that come behind us will be able to understand the church better, understand the church as an entity that fights for others, that loves others the way that your son Jesus came down here to this planet and fought and loved for us. Thank you for sending him. Thank you for the eternal salvation that he grants every single person, despite their shortcomings and failures. Allow us to use our hands, use our feet, and use our voices to show people that love that lives inside of us through the spirit of reconciliation. It's in your name, Jesus, we give all the praise and all the glory. Amen.
Amen. It's awesome. Thank you so much. Appreciate it, Justin.